All right, so now without further ado, I have the privilege of introducing our first speaker. Shannon Healy will be our first speaker. Shannon is an urban resource conservationist with the Chester County Conservation District since December of 2019. Formerly, she worked for the Montgomery County Conservation District for 2.5 years as well, after graduating from Bloomsburg University. Shannon has experience working with HOAs and property management groups in relation to the NOT process and complying with the federal NPDES permit. The floor is yours, Shannon.
Thanks, Jess. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay. And everyone can see that fine? Okay. All right, so I'm just going to give a brief presentation about how conservation districts are involved with the notice of termination and what steps in order to keep your BMPs on site in good condition. As Jess said, if you do have any questions, just please put them in the chat so that way we can answer them at the end. All right, so the notice of termination is the way conservation districts terminate the NPDES permit. The termination of the project is ultimately the responsibility of the applicant, and the engineer will be signing and sealing the notice of termination, verifying that the BMPs on site have been built and functioning as designed. The NOT comes with a set of instructions that provide useful information for the current permit holder, as well as the entity that will be responsible for the site once the NPDES permit has been terminated. As shown here, the NOT instructions provide a useful link for a sample landowner agreement. Again, this is just a sample showing the type of information that should be within the document, such as the type, location, and maintenance of each BMP. The document should be completed and agreed upon by both parties. Per the permit condition, unless an alternative process is approved by the department in writing, upon sale or transfer of any parcel, lot, road, or other real property within the permit boundary, the permittee shall notify the purchaser, grantee, or transferee of the long-term PCSM BMP operations and maintenance requirement. The permittee shall identify the following: the PCSM BMPs on each property, the schedule for inspection and recording, the person or entity responsible for long-term operations and maintenance, and the piece of the PCSM BMPs, and how to properly access the BMPs for maintenance, and a landowner notice should be completed. The landowner notice is a legal document which should be used with legal advice or with advice of legal counsel. Any such landowner notices are not required to be recorded with the instrument. However, they must be submitted with the NOT form. Please note that a planned community declaration may be considered landowner notice if the declaration addresses the mentioned items. At this time, it would be the best interest of the HOA to be sure they have all the appropriate documents, such as the plan sets of the project. So once the project has been completed and the NOT has been submitted, the district will do an administrative review of the NOT to determine that the correct information is there and resembles the PCSM plans that were submitted. Once this has been found complete, the district would conduct our final inspection. Here's a copy of the NOT and what would be included for submission. Complete sections 1 through 8 of the NOT. Sections 1 through 4 provide basic information about the site and the permittee information and the type of the NOT, either full or partial. This will depend on the current site conditions. A full termination would include that the entirety of the site has been built, while the partial would be only when some of the site has been built. Section 5 is a certification of the licensed professional, signing off that the record drawings reflect the as-built conditions. Sections 6 through 8 go through the proof of instrument filing with the recorder of deeds, certifying that all of the information has been submitted and the signing of the NOT. The rest of the checklist goes through the requirements for the record drawings that reflect the as-built drawings, copy of recorder of deeds office receipt for instrument filing, copy of landowner notices, and the complete appendices A, B, and C. These 3 appendices go through the information that should be on the as-built drawings, marking off each BMP that is on site, and will list each BMP and the name of a responsible party. When looking at the BMPs for final inspection, we double check that there is adequate stabilization across the site, the BMPs are functioning, and that all E&S BMPs have been removed. For example, if the inspection is a few days after a rainstorm and we notice the infiltration basin is not holding water, the outlet structure is in good condition, and the basin is properly stabilized, then we can assume that the basin is functioning properly. At that point, the district would write up the final inspection report and complete the NOT, marking it approved and sending notices to the appropriate parties. Reduction, loss, or failure of a BMP will cause NOT denial. For example, if the district comes out for the final inspection, it has been longer than 4 days, and there is standing water in the bottom of an infiltration basin, and vegetation has died away, we could probably assume that the basin is not infiltrating. At this time, an inspection report would be sent out to the appropriate parties to address any issues, and the NOT would be denied. So once the NPDES permit has been terminated and it is now the responsibility of the HOA, there are a few things to keep in mind to make sure the BMPs keep working as designed. Each project comes with a post-construction stormwater management plan. Within those plans should be a detailed description of each BMP on site and the maintenance schedule for each. For example, there may be a vegetated swale that requires mowed twice a year, or a basin that will require inspection after heavy rainfall to ensure it is draining properly. One other thing the operations and maintenance should detail is what the definition of failure is for each BMP. This will point out what signs to look for if the BMP were to stop functioning. In this case, the plan should also provide who to contact if this does occur. Here it is an example of an operations and maintenance chart that was provided on a plan set. You can see the BMP is listed and it provides a clear maintenance schedule. Also included on the operations and maintenance plan is the definition of failure. It also shows who to contact in case of failure. In this case, they point out that if a failure is to occur, to contact the property owner, the management company, or the borough. In other cases, it's also recommended to contact an engineer to assess the BMP. An HOA or property maintenance group may want to keep a log of each BMP and document the routine inspections and maintenance procedures to be sure that it is done in a recommended time frame. One thing to highlight is that once the permit is terminated, it is the HOA's responsibility to maintain all BMPs. If a member of the community would like to install any structures on their property, such as a shed or a pool, it's always best to consult the post-construction plan to be sure that the proposed structures are not within the limits of an existing PCSM BMP. Since the PCSM plan has been recorded, the BMPs are now deed restricted and cannot be removed unless otherwise mitigated on site. Okay, so once the project has been terminated from the NPDES permit and no longer held at the Conservation District, it is usually sent to the local Department of Environmental Protection, or your local municipality should have a copy as well. In this case, for the Southeast Region, PA, the DEP is located in Norristown, Montgomery County. If it does occur that an HOA would need a set of plans after the permit is terminated, it would be best to contact DEP or reach out to your municipality. So if the HOA has a stormwater complaint after the permit has been terminated, it should be directed to the local borough or township. In many cases, these types of complaints would be handled by the township's MS4 permit. For example, here I showed my neighborhood in Phoenixville. They have on their website about the MS4 permit, and they provide a link to contact the borough with questions. Conservation districts are only delegated to address stormwater complaints while the site is still covered under the NPDES permit. Okay. And now we will open it up to questions.
Thanks, Shannon. Looking at the questions in the chat, it's looking like people are looking for clarification as to how this applies. So a general overview for our HOA members of what does NOT mean? What is the NPDES permit? It sounds as if we could take a step back and start at the beginning. That would be great. How does this apply to the HOAs? What is the general context? Thank you.
So the NOT is the notice of termination, which will be terminating the NPDES permit. And the NPDES permit is what is required in order to construct the property or whatever project is being built. So that would include any of the stormwater and E&S controls on site. Yeah, I believe Ed just kind of cleared that up in the comments as well.
Thank you. And how does this apply to systems built prior to 2010? For instance, if the HOA was built in 1985?
I'm not too sure about that. I would have to get back to that question.
Okay, thank you. Do any of our other speakers want to take a stab at that question? Jeff, are you unmuted? Okay, guess not. We'll follow up on that one then.
I'm here. Okay, generally speaking, stormwater management regulations were adopted around 1978. Prior to 78, there were no volume controls or rate controls in place. From 78 to roughly 2003, controls were in place through stormwater ordinances that are at the township level, and county level and state level. And then roughly after about 2003, then the NPDES requirements obviously were changing, but the post-construction plans were then required and then also to be recorded, although I found not always are they recorded. So basically, I use 2003 roughly as the date. Before that, you're not going to see the post-construction and this maintenance. After 2003, you'll see this post-construction and maintenance requirement.
Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome.
Another question, Shannon, in the box. We're not adding new, we're managing existing. Does this apply?
If you're managing existing facilities, and I'll jump in, a lot of these practices are good ones to consider. Naturalization on the basins, maintaining swales, obviously keeping sediment cleaned out, and I'll be going over a lot of this stuff later in my presentation along with Zach Shiron. But a lot of these practices are good things to start implementing because it helps our water quality overall. Our goal here is to clean out all of the nasties, so to speak, all the stuff that comes off cars and parking lots, and do our best to get the streams cleaned. And I think our experience with the Chesapeake has shown a lot of these things really do work, but they do take maintenance.
Thanks, Jeff.
You're welcome.
Another question that came up is where would this plan be located and how would HOAs interface with the plan?
I guess as I mentioned,
I can jump.
if you were looking for a set of plans, your local township or borough should have a copy. You could just reach out stating that you would like a copy of the site development plans.
I'll cover this during my time also.
Okay, great, thank you. Where can we find as-built on file for stormwater management systems? I guess that's a very similar question.
Township.
And then they should be located, it'll say post-construction stormwater management plans, and there should be detailed descriptions of your operations and maintenance for each specific BMP.
All right,
if I can add to that, I will also be covering that in part of my presentation, but that information should be turned over to the association during transition from the developer to the association board.
All right, we'll take one or two more here. Once permit is completed and terminated, what authority has oversight to a community's basins?
Well,
That would then fall to the township or municipality.
All right, and let's see, how does the HOA determine whether or not an issue is a stormwater management issue for which they are responsible as a result of the transfer of responsibilities to them? The main example is distinguishing a drainage or grading issue, which may be a homeowner's responsibility, versus stormwater, which is the association's responsibility. We see this all the time.
I will actually get into that as part of my talk about how association documents describe unit owner responsibility and association responsibility.
Okay, great, excellent. All right, let's see, scrolling through, that might be the bulk of the questions. Again, I'll go through these questions again later. If we miss something, we will certainly follow up. There's a question about acronyms. If we can remind our speakers to please explain acronyms at the beginning of their presentation before using it, that would be helpful to everybody. If there's acronyms you have a question on, feel free to type it in the chat and we'll help you out. Let's see, one more came in. What credentials are required for inspections? I understand that question. Shannon, does that question make sense?
If it's just an inspection from the HOA management company, I don't believe there would be a credential requirement, just as long as that once the permit is terminated, to just keep doing a routine inspection and then documenting year after year if there's any changes to the BMPs.
Okay, thank you. Could the speakers briefly comment on experiences in karst or sinkhole areas regarding operations and maintenance of BMPs? It's a loaded question.
It's a very loaded question. I can jump in. These two concepts of infiltrating in karst areas really go contrary to common sense from the standpoint that obviously we want to infiltrate. We want the water to be clean. We want to keep our aquifers supplied. However, in karst areas, obviously you have a real danger, and our experience shows, of settlements, sometimes in the middle of the road, sometimes around a house. So we really have to limit where the infiltration occurs, and the post-inspection plan since 2003 often specifies where and where not they will infiltrate. The state's websites have, and I don't have a specific reference, the geological plans to help you know what areas are suspect, and typically that's all part of the vetting process during the review of the land development at the township while the development plans are being created. So you do have to be very careful with karst.
Thanks, Jeff.
You're
All
welcome.
right, we'll take one more question I see here, and then we'll move on. Can you show us general overview or map of how our region and how the overall drainage plans are tied together to effectively manage stormwater drainage overall?
I don't have a specific map, but I believe if you could reach out, maybe your township may have a stormwater map like this, or maybe even doing a simple Google search, you might be able to find something helpful for your specific area.
I can help out a little bit. The townships have been required since the early 2000s to have what they call an MS4, which is a municipal separate storm sewer system plan. And part of that plan are various minimum control measures, which are to help water quality. That plan is typically on the township's website, and that plan gets reviewed, I believe, yearly, and I think it gets updated yearly. So the MS4 plan at the township or the borough, whichever is applicable, can often provide a lot of overall township-wide information on the drainage systems.
Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome.
All right, and then one last comment that I'll just read that might be relevant to the presentations coming up. It would be nice to understand exactly what requirements are applicable at the HOA level. So I imagine that could be addressed in the additional presentations coming up as well. All right, thank you so much, Shannon. We're going to move on to our second speaker. Our second speaker is Carl Wiener. Mr. Wiener co-chairs the real estate and zoning departments at the land sale firm of Hamburg, Rubin, Mullen, Maxwell, and Lupin. For over 2 decades, he's handled an enormous array of real estate law matters for Delaware Valley clients, ranging from zoning and land development to real estate finance and acquisition. His work includes the development of over 150 condominiums and homeowners associations, and he has extensive experience in zoning litigation from numerous appearances before zoning hearing boards. A frequent lecturer for the Pennsylvania Bar Institute, the Community Associations Institute, and the Montgomery Bar Association, Mr. Wiener is a past chairman of the MBA's Real Estate Land Use Committee. He served on the MBA Board of Directors and currently serves as president of the Montgomery Bar Foundation. He's also past president of the Pennsylvania Greater Delaware Valley chapter of Community Associations Institute. Carl was selected by his peers for inclusion in the Best Lawyers of America 2016 through 2021, and also 2021 Lawyer of the Year in the area of land use and zoning law. Carl is also a fellow with the College of Community Association Lawyers, a graduate of Boston University School of Law. Mr. Wiener received his undergrad degree from Brown University. All right, Carl, please take it away.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. So I have been practicing association law for over 30 years, and I have seen the number of homeowner associations in Pennsylvania grow exponentially. One of the driving forces behind that is the Stormwater Management Act of 1978, which introduced the process of stormwater control to development, and more recent regulations that have been put in place over the last 10 years relating to the permitting process for grading and stormwater controls. You've heard a reference to the NPDES permit. That is the permit that developers are required to get in order to move dirt and create stormwater controls. And after they are finished development, they want to be released from this permit and usually handed over to another entity, which is the association, and that is the notice of termination process. And I will go into that. So this morning, I want to talk for a few minutes about the legal framework behind the trend towards homeowner associations and having associations assume responsibility for long-term maintenance of stormwater management facilities. The first foundation of the legal framework for homeowner association stormwater maintenance responsibilities are PCSM plans. That stands for post-construction stormwater management. And plans which detail first the initial construction sequence for stormwater controls, which are also known as BMPs, best management practices. And these plans detail what stormwater controls are going to be on a property, as well as short-term erosion and sedimentation measures that must be taken by the developer when they do this initial grading in the development. PCSM plans also detail long-term operation and maintenance of these best management practices, BMPs, once they have been established and stabilized. So typically the PCSM plans, the post-construction stormwater management plans, contain detailed notes about the specific frequency and the manner of maintaining each type of stormwater control or BMP. In addition, the municipality in which the development is located will enter into an operations and maintenance agreement, which is creatively known as an O&M agreement, with the developer, which states that the developer has a responsibility for long-term operation and maintenance of these BMPs. This is the second element of the framework that gives the association responsibility, because the O&M agreements that enter into between the developer and the municipality give the developer the right to assign the obligations for long-term maintenance to another party. That party can be the owner of the lot on which the BMP is located. However, since stormwater facilities in most developments, except for very large lot developments that may have their own independent rain gardens and swales and other self-standing sort of stormwater controls, in most developments, the stormwater system is all interconnected within the development. So typically an entity is established for the purpose of maintaining the overall stormwater process in the long term, and usually that entity is a homeowners association. And in Pennsylvania, I can tell you from experience that nearly all new developments over the last 10 years have been set up with some form of a homeowners association. Now, the term homeowners association, by the way, is really a generic term. So just to be clear, in Pennsylvania, there are typically two forms of associations. There are condominium associations that are created under the Uniform Condominium Act, and planned community associations that are formed under the Pennsylvania Uniform Planned Community Act. Condominiums and planned communities are forms of ownership. They are not types of developments. So that if you picture in your mind a typical townhouse development or mid-rise apartment building or an estate development, those actually can be condominiums or planned communities. So they are forms of ownership. They are not, again, they're not types of developments. What they have in common is that these planned communities or condominiums each have areas that are set aside for private ownership, and they're known as units. So they may be actual lots, or they may be the footprint of a townhouse, or any other way that that unit is described. That's the area set aside for private ownership. And there are also areas that are designated for common ownership and common maintenance responsibility, and they are the common elements of the association. So all condominiums and all planned communities have units and they have common elements. So let's talk a little bit about the interplay between this PCSM plan, which has been prepared as part of the development process that details maintenance of stormwater, and associations. The third element or the foundation of the legal framework of association stormwater management maintenance is the association declaration itself. The stormwater process from an association perspective starts with the drafting of the association declaration. The declaration is the constitution of the association. The association does not exist until the declaration is recorded in the county courthouse where the development is located. And as soon as that declaration is recorded, that association exists at that time. So the declaration creates the association. It defines these areas of private ownership known as units. It defines common responsibilities, and it talks about what the association is going to be responsible to maintain. The declaration will also maintain something called controlled facilities, which are improvements that the association does not directly own, but has some responsibility to inspect or maintain. Well, stormwater facilities can either be common facilities or they can be controlled facilities. Common facilities typically would be basins in open space. Those are common facilities. They're owned by the association. They're operated by the association. Controlled facilities may be things like rain gardens in individual lots, which are owned by the individual unit owner, but the association may have some responsibility to maintain those rain gardens. There may be stormwater pipes located within a roadway. Now, the roadway itself may be dedicated to the municipality, but the association may have the responsibility to maintain those stormwater pipes within the roadway. They become controlled facilities. There may be off-site basins that are maintained by the association, even though they are not within the association community property, but they're part of a regional overall stormwater management that the association is required to either maintain or contribute to the cost of maintaining, and that is also a controlled facility. And the other aspect to keep in mind is that best management practices, which describes rain gardens and basins and inlets and all types of components of stormwater systems, don't necessarily have to be structural. Street sweeping is an example of a best management practice that is not structural. And some associations are responsible for street sweeping, even for roads that have been dedicated to the township. And again, in that case, that would be a controlled facility. So the declaration is intended to clearly spell out the responsibilities of the unit owner and the responsibility of the association for all forms of BMPs. And these maintenance responsibilities should be taken directly from the PCSM plans. PCSM plan has been reviewed and approved by the municipality and by the county conservation district, so there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. When I draft an association document, I take the language from the PCSM plan, all the long-term maintenance notes, and put them right into the declaration. So there's a detailed list of requirements for each stormwater component. The declaration should also clearly state that the declarant has entered into an operations and maintenance, an O&M agreement for stormwater maintenance, which indicates that the association is responsible not only to its members, but it also answers to a higher authority. The association is responsible ultimately to the municipality to conduct inspections and prepare reports regarding the condition of the stormwater facilities, forevermore on an ongoing basis. These laws are relatively new. These facilities now are relatively new, but they will age in place, and these responsibilities will become more and more important as stormwater systems age in place. So it ties all together. You have the association declaration, you have the PCSM plan. You also have something called a PCSM declaration, a post-construction stormwater management declaration. And when that permit is issued by the County Conservation District or DEP to the developer to move dirt and create these stormwater systems, at that time, they are supposed to file a PCSM declaration that details what the stormwater systems are going to be on the property. That is a recorded document, again, recorded in the county where the development is. And the final component is a new property owner notification form. So where there are any BMPs on individual lots, developers are required to give to lot owners notice that, what those BMPs are, what BMPs are going to be located on their lots, and who is going to be responsible for maintaining those BMPs, whether it's going to be the individual homeowner or whether it's going to be the association itself. So all of these documents should come together to give disclosure. That's what this is really all about. You have what's called constructive disclosure, something that is recorded in the courthouse that provides information that to all prospective lot owners now and forevermore, whether it's in the documents that the homeowner received, it is there in the county courthouse and can be retrieved from the county courthouse. And you have actual notice. You have the language in the declaration. You have the language in the new property owner notification form. And also, developers are required to give new property owners a public offering statement, which explains what the association is all about. And as part of that public offering statement, there should be language that either spells out the stormwater maintenance requirements or specifically references a section in the declaration where those requirements are located. So both the Planned Community Act and the Condominium Act, again, which govern all associations in Pennsylvania, were recently amended a couple of years ago to actually require a declaration to include a statement that the association or the unit owner, as may be applicable, is deemed responsible for long-term maintenance of post-construction stormwater management BMPs once the notice of termination is approved. If that statement is in the declaration, it serves as notice to and the agreement of the association and unit owners that they're going to take on long-term responsibility. So let's talk about a little bit about you've heard about the termination of the NPDES, which is also the notice of termination process, the NOT process. That's the process that begins the transferring of operation and maintenance responsibilities to the association as part of this NOT process. And the handoff is critical. The permittee, typically the developer, is required to provide a copy of recorded drawings to the association, including any as-builts which show any changes in the stormwater management facilities from the time that they were originally approved. And those as-builts need to be recorded against the property. And I mentioned earlier a PCSM declaration. A declaration, again, that may need to be amended if there are as-builts to be attached. So any changes must be recorded against the property. That creates an interesting situation for developers because typically developers may start to transition open space to an association once control of the board transitions from the developer to a homeowner elected board when 75% of the units are sold in the development. However, if the open space is transferred before the BMPs are completed, before they've been finally reviewed, before the notice of termination has been issued, then the developer needs to think carefully about the timing of transferring that open space because now the association is going to control that area and they have to come onto the association's property to make corrections to the to the basins or the other stormwater facilities, and they have to record documents against the association's property. And from the association's perspective, why would they want to own any facilities that have not yet been completed or finally approved? So what has become the latest trend is that developers are holding off and transitioning this open space and these facilities until the development is entirely completed and until the notice of termination has been approved. Now, during this transition process, the association board should be working with the developer and the municipal engineer to determine punch lists for completion. And there may be separate punch lists that are worked out with the developer and worked out with the municipality. And the municipality and association should work cooperatively to determine which improvements will have municipal oversight and which improvements the association will oversee in the transfer of ownership. Of course, the ultimate goal of the developer and the municipality and DEP is to be in a position to terminate the developer's responsibility for stormwater management facilities under the NPDES permit and put the association in its place once the BMPs have been completed and stabilized. Nobody wants the developer entity to hang on to that NPDES permit forever, because the developer entity, once that development is finished, may be defunct, may not have any assets, and may not have the ability to continue to comply or be an entity that any government agency can enforce any action against. So the transition to the association becomes a very critical part from the government's perspective, as well as from unit owners and the association's perspective. So associations should be part of that process of transition. They should be aware of, familiar with the County Conservation District. The County Conservation District should work with the association as well. The associations need to be part of that process of transition. Finally, you get into an issue both for new facilities and older facilities as to whether stormwater facility issues that have come up are in fact design deficiencies or whether they are maintenance issues. Some developments take several years to complete, and the association is responsible for some level of maintenance. So typical issues are erosion around inlets and sinkholes and dead vegetation. Are they maintenance issues or are they design deficiency issues? That needs to be determined as part of this process. And for that reason, again, the developer may want to consider keeping and maintaining BMPs until the NOT is approved, because even though it involves additional expense on the part of the developer gets to maintain control over the condition of those BMPs until they are actually turned over. And the association, on the other hand, should not be responsible for BMPs until they are completed and stabilized and they are certified to be in good conditions. So I know I've thrown a lot out. These are really just some of the fundamental concepts that are involved in creating and operating associations and the ability of associations to undertake maintenance of these facilities on a long-term basis.
Thank you very much, Carl. We do have some questions in the chat for you.
Sure.
Are annual inspections, state, federal, or municipal, expected to be put in place at some time in the future for systems built prior to permitting process? We recognize this is something that should be done, but will it be mandated in the future?
Yeah, right now, I think under current regulations, there's really nothing in place for those older associations. And in so many ways, you know, the associations, there are a lot of associations that are out there that were created even before the Planned Community Act came into effect. Eventually, regulations may be put in place to apply to those facilities as well. But typically, those facilities are a little less complex than the newer facilities, because they typically just have a basin, and they may not have all the, you know, the stormwaters and the rain gardens and everything else that are components. But yes, under the association documents, they are required to maintain them in good condition. There is no regulation for municipal enforcement of that at this point, but I foresee at some point that may occur.
Thank you. Next question. So do declarations need to be amended as needed to specifically include and articulate PCSM plans?
Well, the declaration, if it's for an older community, there is no PCSM plan for an older community because they simply were not required really before 2010. If declaration does not incorporate the language that is in the PCSM plan for newer associations that have been created in the last 10 years, yes, I think the declaration should be amended to incorporate some of that language.
Thank you. What about swales? Are these BMPs if they are on owners' lots?
They are BMPs. So again, the BMPs is a very broad term, best management practices, that encompasses all types of stormwater facilities, and swales, which direct water, are certainly part of the overall stormwater management system. Whether they are the unit owner's responsibility or the association's responsibility typically should be spelled out in the declaration. Unfortunately, many declarations don't go into that level of detail. So an assumption has to be made that they are within an individual lot, that they are the lot owner's responsibility, unless the declaration says otherwise.
Thank you. I'm going to read this one as written. Does it follow that grading issues are also BMP issues as they affect conveyance of stormwater?
Yes, yes, it's all interrelated. Absolutely.
Great. Does either the county or the township do their own inspections or checks of the HOAs to ensure that they are in fact conducting their own inspections and taking corrective actions of any deficiencies noted?
Well, at this point, I don't believe that county conservation districts or DEP is aggressively conducting inspections. I think there's really a manpower issue on their part to be able to do that. But the law is there, the mechanism is there, and at some point, I believe, as these systems age in place, the process of inspection, from the county conservation district level and the Department of Environmental Protection level may be a little more aggressive. But right now, that it hasn't really been the case to my knowledge.
Thank you. How does stormwater management responsibilities play out between a master association and the associated developments?
So for large scale developments, there are often large scale community-wide stormwater management systems. Certainly in a newer development, that will be the case. The respective documents for the master association, there should be a declaration for the master association as well as a declaration for the sub-associations. So the master association declaration may say that the large basins or community-wide systems are the master association's responsibility, whereas smaller rain gardens or swales or smaller components of the stormwater system that are located within an individual sub-association are the responsibility of that sub-association. Generally, these systems are all interconnected, so it's not unusual for the master association to be responsible for the overall property, whether it's located within master association common or within a sub-association common.
Thank you. Is the developer still responsible for design deficiencies after sign-off?
Yes, and I mean, well, it depends what after sign-off. So at some point, the municipal engineer is going to review the facilities that have been completed and give them a sign-off, and the county conservation district is going to review the facilities as well. So I would say once the sign-off occurs, then the experts have made their best effort to review the operation and the implementation of the plans that have been put into place. So I'd say at that point, once there is a sign-off from the municipality, from the county conservation district, once the developer gets their NOT, the developer really is no longer responsible at that point. Everybody's made their best effort at that point.
Thank you. We'll take a few more. There's some really good questions coming in. If understanding correctly, the municipality should have a defined inspection process.
Well, eventually, yes. I mean, technically under the MS4 permit, which is the municipality's overall permit for stormwater oversight, they should have an inspection plan in place. Again, this is relatively new in the grand scope of things. These regulations have been implemented, have been put in place, and are starting to be implemented. Many municipalities do not have an inspection process. However, as I've said, as communities age in place, as there are more and more associations within every municipal community, I anticipate these inspections will become more commonplace.
Thank you. This is a specific one. Once HOAs assume responsibility for their basins, are trash guards required on the outlets of basins?
That depends on the design details that are in the PCSM plans.
Okay. In principle, what stormwater infrastructure is more efficiently managed by municipality and which more efficiently managed by the association? Taxes versus HOA fees. Expertise?
Well, that's a good question. And that goes into overall issue of municipal services and people paying taxes, and some people's roads are being plowed by the municipality and some people have private roads. The bottom line is that municipalities have delegated, and this is why they enter into these O&M agreements. They don't want to be responsible for mowing 150 basins across their community, or be responsible for clearing debris or other maintenance within the municipal boundaries. And so that's why it is delegated to associations which have been set up for this purpose. Municipalities just can't take on that scope. Now, if there is a large-scale regional basin, and I've seen that in certain municipalities which have flooding issues historically, and they have tried to work with developers to set up regional basins, in some cases, the municipality will take on responsibility for those regional basins. But in general, the municipalities are giving that responsibility to the individual associations.
Thank you. We'll take two more questions here before we move on. Thank you also to district staff that are helping to answer these questions in the chat. What is the name of the legal document that signs off the maintenance responsibility to the association?
Well, there is the operation and maintenance agreement, which establishes the long-term maintenance responsibilities, and there is the association declaration itself, which should detail long-term maintenance responsibilities. Once the notice of termination is approved, then the association kind of steps in place based on those documents which have already been developed and recorded in the county courthouse.
Thank you. And we'll take one more here. If no municipal process for inspection, what process should an HOA follow?
Well, the HOA should, again, the PCSM plan should detail a regular timing of inspection of different facilities, whether typically they are annually or after a major rain event, within 48 hours of a major rain event. Those are the typical times that are spelled out for inspection of stormwater facilities. The whole idea is to make sure they are functioning properly. Number one, that they are cleared of debris, so there's nothing blocking all the channels that have been put into place. And number two, that they are conveying stormwater in the way that they are supposed to. And that really, it does not involve any particular expertise. It's a visual determination as to whether these facilities are operating correctly. Debris is a simple solution. They can be simply cleaned out. If they're not functioning properly, that's where an expert may need to be brought in to take a look at the facilities and see whether there's a broken pipe or a grading issue or some sort of serious erosion that needs to be corrected, and that needs to be managed.
Great, thank you very much, Carl. Excellent questions coming in as well, so don't hesitate to put more in the chat. We'll get them answered after if you still have questions. Thank you very much for that presentation, Carl. And at this time, we will move on to our third speaker. All right, we'll be moving on next to Jeffrey Wirt. We're going to hear from an engineer's perspective. Jeff Wirt, professional engineer, serves as president of Metz Engineering. Mr. Wirt attended Drexel University and has served as a municipal engineer for 28 years and also has expertise and experience with community associations, working with over 75 communities since 1995. Outside of municipal and community engineering and assistance, Jeffrey serves as an engineer for subdivisions and land development, working for more than 40 churches, commercial stores, office buildings, funeral homes, age-restricted facilities, and medical offices since 1984. Jeffrey also serves on the Montgomery County Board of Viewers and numerous municipal zoning hearing boards in Bucks and Montgomery counties. The floor is yours, Jeff.
Thank you. Trying to figure out how to do the screen share. I can't say I've ever done one before.
We can see it. You can put it in presentation mode.
Can everybody see the screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the time. There's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of overload on terms and abbreviations and things that we're kind of used to using in the business, but we appreciate the questions very much. Stormwater management, and we went over this a little bit earlier. The key dates to me are 78, when the original Stormwater Management Act was adopted, and that basically adopted stormwater rate controls. And what this says is that you could not put any more water downstream after development than before development. It also talked about other things about diverting water if people had wells and issues like that. But the big takeaway was really, this is when we started controlling it, and we started doing larger detention basins. There were detention basins starting in the early 70s for erosion sediment control, but the rate controls were really 78 when they started. The second part was 2003, when we started having post-construction plans. And I believe 2010 is when the NPDES requirement went from 5 acres to 1 acre. And I think that's where 2010 comes in. And as Carl noted, and I'll touch on, and Zach will touch on, post-construction stormwater management plan and the report have a large amount of information that help the association, both the board and the residents and the manager, going forward on what they need to maintain and timing and such. And we can address some of that with the questions. Pre-2003, we talked about existing developments. They have swales, detention basins, storm sewers, all those improvements. What's really important to know is get a copy of the approved construction plans. And one of the questions that came up was, typically the municipality has these, some are scanned, some are paper and need to be scanned, but getting the construction plans, all the design, the notes and the details, that helps, because that's basically a blueprint of what was to be built. There's a recorded development agreement that will often have conditions in it for maintenance, and as Carl mentioned, operations and maintenance agreements. There's an approval resolution or approval letter that may also have terms and conditions. Developments are also subject to the applicable municipal ordinances, such as zoning, subdivision land development, stormwater management, grading streets. All of these things have elements of maintenance built in. There is typically an approved stormwater management report. Sometimes there's notes and details in that report that don't reflect on the plans. There's an approved erosion sediment control plan and a report, or ENS as we talk about it. And typically, and this was one of the questions, yearly inspections are not required for most of these, but they're often recommended. And once a year, at least gives you a good look. Is everything functioning? Is there clogging? Is there water? You know, typically you might see 6 to 8 inches of water in some of the Bmps, but if you're getting 2 or 3 feet, then it may not be functioning. And there's ways to address improving it or changing vegetation. One too many. Okay, post 2003, when we started having PCSM, post-construction stormwater maintenance plans, or PCSWM, they're known both way, post-construction stormwater maintenance plans. Once these plans were part of the plan set, the requirements were that they get recorded at the courthouse in that particular county, which is a good thing. Sometimes the scale and the clarity of those is difficult to read. You should, when you're transitioning, get a copy of all those items as part of the transition package. I would say this and I'll say it again, read the notes. Engineers love notes. We love notes to cover all kinds of things. And oftentimes you'll find a wealth of information buried within the notes. As Carl mentioned, there's a stormwater O&M agreement, operations and maintenance, and this will spell out all of the items that the HOA will have to do going forward after the NOT, notice of termination, is closed. There are approved plans, subdivision land development or construction improvement. Again, read the notes because they often clarify maintenance responsibilities, or as Carl said, if the township takes the streets, is the HOA still responsible for the storm sewers underneath? The development agreement, as we mentioned before, contain conditions of approval and the approval resolution or letter. And again, I want to call out, each of these developments are different. Different things are HOA responsibility, and sometimes things are a shared responsibility or township responsibility. So you really have to have your individual documents and your declaration. The Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System Program, MS4, we talked about earlier, that's basically the township's way of controlling their water quality. And each township is required to control, and I say township, I mean municipality, township, or borough. They're required to control their stormwater. Townships typically have been filing a yearly report. I believe the reporting period ends in March. The report's due in June. And that report should contain a lot of information, including inspections. That's something that the township can do now. They can require the inspections now for everything, again, post-2003. Approved stormwater management report, erosion and sediment control, and again, yearly inspections and reports are required under MS4 and PCSM plans. Prior to the notice of termination, obviously as the development is getting built and close to being done, as Carl said, a lot of the developers like to keep control of all the BMPs, like to keep control of the open space, because all of these things are negatively impacted by the development. Development and dirt moving and construction it generates a lot of dust, generates dirt, soil erosion. All these things serve to degrade the BMPs. BMPs don't like lots of silt, don't like all of the other roadway chemicals that get to them. So what you want to do is be familiar with all the required maintenances that are called for under your post-construction plan. When you're getting close, take photos of everything, document the condition prior to the development, the HOA taking over responsibility. I think this is an important point. And again, all of these things are built, but they don't always function right away. There are some of these vegetations, and Zach can cover this a little bit, that take anywhere from a year to 3 years to really grow in. So when they plant a certain mix in a basin, that's a wet basin, it doesn't always show up right away. So it takes time. Have copies of all your plans and reports. Again, this is information that you should get through transition. The township should have a complete copy of everything that you can obtain through a right to know request. And then sometimes we go back right to the developer's engineer and often get copies of stuff right from the engineer. Something I've done with a couple communities, create a subcommittee to manage and do periodic site walks. You often have 1 or 2 board members or 1 or 2 residents that maybe have some construction background or some expertise or landscape management or vegetation. Get these guys involved, have them do periodic site walks. Keep an eye on what's happening. The basins clog up very easily, and that comment about the trash racks is important. You want a trash rack, and you got to clean it out. I've seen some of these that get very little maintenance, and prior to transition, the basin's got 3 or 4 feet of water that it shouldn't, and that takes away from the natural vegetation taking root. And then provide all that documentation to your landscape management company or any other contracts you utilize for that work. Post-construction measures, again, look at the post-construction stormwater management plans and report. The retention-detention basins, essentially for volume rate control and for some stormwater control. In many cases, they use the detention basin for sediment control, And what happens is, in some cases, excuse me, the sediment will often slow down the rate of water being able to infiltrate in these areas. There are surface infiltration areas, bioswales, rain gardens, underground infiltration areas, excuse me again, and inlet snouts. And I have some pictures of some of these things. You can see what they are. Post-construction plans are typically recorded. I do believe some municipalities didn't get into recording them right away, but I believe they are now. Again, read the notes. The notes contain tons of information, all of the maintenance guidelines, the maintenance requirements, timing reports. This is all part of the NPDES permit, and we talked a little bit about the notice of termination. Once the permit's closed and the O&M agreement signed, the HOA takes on this responsibility, and I believe Carl touched on the fact that this can be assigned to or turned over to other entities. Maintenance, before you take it over, do a careful inspection. Look at silt, pollutants, vegetation, erosion, poor grass growth. Underground systems are very susceptible to siltation during and after construction. I will say this, flushing and removal is difficult and expensive. That truck that come in and flush and take sediment out of underground basins is going to run you between $2,500 and $5,000 a day. There are inlet snouts, which are fiberglass devices that are designed to keep plastic bottles, glass bottles, all those larger pollutants out of the stormwater system. Those will need to be periodically opened up and maintained. Keep your inlets clean. One of the biggest things I see when I'm inspecting is I see inlets that are either clogged on the surface, which means they're not functioning, especially leaves, and then there's a material in the bottom, sometimes clogging the water from getting into the pipe. Road sweeping, as Carl mentioned, is a BMP that can keep the amount of silt down. As asphalt roads weather from outside weather and from sun, they dry out. As it dries out, that surface layer of stone gets looser and looser and then eventually gets washed in. Seal coat your roads periodically, minimizes aggregate loss, which again keeps your systems more clean. Check your vegetation, good grass growth in the swales. Check your outlet structures. Clogging is often one of the biggest issues. You may need to flush and televise all the underground pipes and infiltration areas. Again, when they're buried after they're done, it's very difficult to get that silt out. Good housekeeping, and most associations already have these rules. Prohibit vehicle maintenance, oil changes, things like that, that really do damage to all these systems. Keep good grass growth. This is very important. All that silt that occurs from erosion will get into your storm system and into your BMPs. And then again, as the PCSM plan requires, keep your vegetation. I also want to point out, most PCSM plans incorporate management of all of the street trees and buffers and areas that are to be preserved. So vegetation management is very important. Zach will touch on that a little bit. Maintain all trees, shrubs, evergreens, we just mentioned. Subcommittee, we mentioned. There are many of these inspections the board can do themselves or residents can do themselves with a little bit of training, and then engage professional help when needed. Typically, I would say once a year, you really want somebody to come in that has the training. As noted in the questions, there are courses out there on stormwater management inspections and training, and a lot of this is simply just having the time and experience in the field, being involved with building developments like this. Types of underground systems, just to touch on them so you can see them, keep in the back of your mind. Pipes such as high density polyethylene, concrete, metal. I will say this, metal is very difficult. It is subject to premature failure and rusting, depending on if it has water in it all the time. If there's silt accumulating, it stays wet. Plastic chambers or arch-type pipes, I'll show you one. what we call in the business a box of rocks or ballast-filled pit. This is often on a lot to handle the roof drains. Roofs water is considered clean and can be infiltrated. Tanks and vaults for heavier duty, and then pervious pavements. I do know some communities are built with pervious pavement. It needs to be vacuumed periodically, typically once or twice a year, and oftentimes the municipality will ask for a receipt from a company that does that type of work. The storm modules, these are like arch-type chambers to store stormwater underground. If you look carefully, there are very limited ways to look at this, and if those pipes are in the range of 18 to 24 inches, getting in is a confined space issue. So sometimes you have to televise these, and you can't always get a good picture of all the silt that gets accumulated. Concrete tanks, we did one of these a couple of years ago in one of the municipalities I worked in, and it was done for a bus garage where they needed the ability to park on top with buses, quite a load. They're a little bit easier to access if the openings are big enough, but same thing, very difficult to flush. HDP pipes, sometimes there's a series of pipes like this with manifolds. If the pipes are big enough, somebody can get in, but again, you have confined space, OSHA issues to be careful of. Modular chambers, egg crates, there's a whole lot of names. These are often, they're about 96, 97% volume, which they're very efficient. However, structurally, you just have to be careful depending on how much load is on top of them. Again, also, getting the silt out once it's in there is very problematic. Pervious paving, if you look at the top of the parking area close to those 3 black cars, you'll notice it's very shiny. That is conventional paving, where you can see, and this was a fairly heavy storm when I took the picture, a lot of rain coming off. In the foreground of the picture is a pervious pavement that was installed on 2 feet of stone. And that serves as 2 things. It helps filter the water as it gets into the groundwater, and it also stores a volume of water. Pervious is going to last you maybe 10, 15, with good maintenance, 20 years, but it doesn't have fines in it. It lets the water through. It's very subject to clogging, so you have to vacuum it. So it's something you definitely have to keep track of. I'm aware of at least one development recently, all the driveways are pervious paving. Seepage bed, box of rocks. This is more often just a residential thing, filled with a ballast, covered with a fabric to keep excess silt out. And this would then help you, again, infiltrate water. Long term, I think these are good things. We're infiltrating, and I believe the current requirement is you have to infiltrate the first 2 inches of any storm. And then snouts. These are basically designed to keep all of the trash out of the storm system. They do need to be maintained periodically. You have to pull the inlet grate off, which you can see in the reflection, and the snout itself will need to be open. The whole thing needs to be cleaned out, and this is something you're probably going to have to do yearly. So it's good to be aware of which inlets have snouts. Management companies, keep an archive of everything. Plans, reports, inspections, documentation. It's important that gets passed on, that the board or board members have copies and some continuity. Vegetation management is important. Best management practices, BMPs, again, follow the post-construction plan. Pavement maintenance to control the asphalt issues. Resealing, repaving. Enhancements, and Zach will cover this in detail. There's other types of vegetation. There are naturalized basins that can cut down on mowing. You really want to watch your use of fertilizers because they take away from the basin's ability to be healthy and keep all the cuttings away from the basins. The fertilizers and the cuttings lean to that, what we call a green monster, where the surface of the basin has a sheen of green algae. Walk the site after storm events. Carl touched on that. And that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Very informative. We do have some questions and we do have a few minutes. So I will read some questions for you.
Okay.
Will there be any grant money available from the state to help HOAs with these expenses?
There are grants available, and we've done, okay, I'm back. I've done a couple basin naturalizations where grant was available either through a conservation agency, and there's probably half a dozen operating in Southeast PA. And I can't specifically say who has the money or where to find it, but I know there are grants available if you have somebody that can do research, and I have somebody, if anybody wants to email me, that can help with that research. But yes, there are some grants. Again, if you naturalize a basin, you're helping the water quality long term. And I think to go back and touch on something that was mentioned in the questions, for developments that are older than 2003 that don't have the PCSM plans, you may not have a lot of these BMPs built in, but it's not a bad thing to start now, because the townships, under their MS4, Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System plan, the townships are required to improve their water quality long term.
Thanks, Jeff. I'll add on that the conservation districts might serve as a resource for HOAs looking to do some of that naturalization work. So you could reach out to your local county conservation district. There's one in each county. I know specifically here in Montgomery County, we have a no-till drill seeder, and that can be used to convert mowed turf lawn to meadow. It can also be used to naturalize basins. We've done a few demonstrations with that tool to drill seed in a warm season grass, cool season grass mix, pollinator plots, that sort of thing, to convert traditional turf to an alternative, more naturalized grass seed mix. So that's a tool that might be appropriate, or conservation districts can just provide the technical assistance. We have watershed specialists on staff that can come out and assist, as well as engineers, assist with naturalizing properties, so don't hesitate to reach out. All right, let's see. How would you find an appropriate inspector?
Most civils, like me, that do some form of development work, design, construction inspection, municipal engineering, stuff like that, we kind of have that built-in training from years of building this stuff. Guys like Zach, who's next up, that have years of experience in building these, maintaining them, and sometimes fixing them. You know, obviously we want everything to work the first time, but sometimes changes need to be made. Guys with experience in vegetation, biology, aquatic plants, things like that, will often have a good a set of tools to use.
Thank you. Any thoughts about a management and maintenance checklist for HOAs and municipalities?
Yes, DEP does have, and I can share this with you guys, a standard checklist for inspections, which has a lot of these elements wrapped up with them. It's a 2-page document, and it's typically a document I use as a guide when I do an inspection for a yearly HOA inspection.
Okay, great. If you want to email that over to me, Jeff, I can send that out when I send. There's a request to send the chat to the attendees because there's been great information shared in the chat. So I will do that, and I can also forward over any documents as well. All right, are there any plans for municipalities to stop the fog and chip on their own roads as their cheap fix, especially when the roads border basins? It is an expensive waste of HOA funds to keep cleaning out the drain inlets on all these shed stones.
I'll jump in on that one. Everybody hates oil and chip. It's noisy, the oil gets all over. But with all due respect, I have never seen a more effective way economically and structurally to keep a road together. I have a road in a township near me, was failing after 12 years because it was not built correctly. We oil and chipped it 10 years ago. It's still there, it's still working, all the cracks are still sealed. I do recognize that the chips can get in. It's important after the oil and chips is installed that it gets sealed, but many of your rural townships are going to continue to do this because really it's one of the better bang for the bucks in terms of roadway maintenance.
Thank you. I wanted to emphasize a comment that was put in the chat by Robert Pace. He commented that at Stony Creek Farms development here in Montgomery County, they used the Tree Vitalize grant not only to protect the riparian buffers, riparian areas, but also add vegetation to bioretention ponds and rain gardens. So that was a Tree Vitalize grant. The conservation districts can give you information on that. It is a riparian buffer tree planting grant. Great option that HOAs might be interested in. So another plug to put out there.
Just to add, Natural Lands Trust and Wissahickon Watershed also have programs that you could look into.
Great, thank you. Yes, the Conservation District knows a lot about different grant funding sources that might be available. There are various different programs out there. So if you're looking for grant funding, looking for trees, reach out to your Conservation District. They can probably help. All right, let's see. Where can we find vendors who can televise underground systems?
There are, and if you just Google it, there's many names out there. And I mean, I won't give you any specific names now, but I do keep a list of 7 or 8 guys that can televise. What you really want is a company that has a motorized camera, has wheels. They're down to about 4 inches in size. There are push cameras available, but they don't keep track of the location. And the video is kind of jerky or in segments. But there are many firms available. I Google it first, underground televising.
Thank you. All right, we'll take 1 or 2 more here. Are there basin standard operating maintenance and inspection procedures that can be made available to HOAs?
For older basins, I am not aware of a specific procedure. Obviously, for any of the newer ones, using the post-construction plan. And to be honest, a lot of the elements of the post-construction plans on the newer ones would apply to the older basins. The exception that a lot of the older basins may typically have a grass bottom or a concrete low flow channel and not a vegetated bottom. But a lot of the newer procedures would apply.
Thank you. We'll take 1 more question and then we'll move on to our final speaker. So this final question looks like it has multiple parts. I'll just read it out loud. If you need me to reread it, I can. We are an HOA with 1985 system and want to be proactive. Would guidance be summarized as follows? 1, hire an engineer for assessment and remediation plan. 2, act on remediation plan and neglected maintenance. 3, create O&M agreement with approval of township. And 4, amend declaration with O&M agreement and record with county. Anything else?
I think 1 and 2 are excellent measures. Get the right people in to take a look at it, develop a plan. As far as creating an O&M agreement, unless you have to, I wouldn't do that. Obviously, you want a guideline or a checklist or a procedure within your association between your board, your manager, and your residents. But I'm not sure we need an agreement. I would defer to Carl on that.
Yeah, if I can jump in on that, I don't think there would be any point to entering into an O&M agreement after the fact, because the whole point of the O&M agreement is to say that the developer and ultimately some other entity has long-term maintenance responsibilities. If you have 1985, you're a 1985 direct association, you're already in the position where you have long-term maintenance responsibilities. So there's really no point in the agreement with the municipality. But amending the declaration may be something that is helpful to you so that everybody is clear, the current board and future boards, regarding maintenance responsibilities for stormwater.
Thank you, Carl. And thank you very much, Jeff, for your presentation, and everyone for your great comments. Don't hesitate to put more in the chat, but at this time we'll move on to our 4th and final speaker. All right, our 4th speaker is Zach Shiron. Zach Shiron is the Director of Civil Engineering for Shiron Environmental. Zach has been working at the intersection of implementation and maintenance of stormwater Bmps since joining his family's commercial landscaping business in 2014. Prior to that, Zach was a project manager with Van Cleef Engineering, designing stormwater management and erosion and sedimentation control facilities for land development projects. Since joining the family business, Zach has been instrumental in educating Shiron Environmental's design clients in the value preventive maintenance to their BMPs, and the restoration of aging stormwater infrastructure. Sounds very relevant to today's discussion. All right, the floor is yours, Zach.
All right, thanks everybody. I'm gonna try and get the screen sharing going here. Here we go. Jess, can you let me know whether or not this is showing the actual presentation or this thing with the ticker on it?
It's showing, we can see your screen, but it's not in presentation mode. It's in your mode.
Got it. Let me see if I can. How is that?
Perfect.
All right. Well, thanks, Jessica. I'm Zach Shiron with Shiron Environmental Design. And what I really want to talk about today is BMP establishment, maintenance, and repair. Carl and Jeff both touched on this, but prior to 2003, there really wasn't any forethought into what was going on with the maintenance of these facilities and how to really keep them up to date. Between 2003 and really 2010, it was a really learning process as to what was being required. And as far as the maintenance and inspections were concerned, the NPDES guidelines were changing during that time. And really from 2010 on, we've seen a lot of communities that really have good operation and maintenance notes. The post-construction stormwater management plans are all there and being transferred to the communities. So when we're talking about above ground basins, and especially establishment of wetland basins, bioretention areas, rain gardens, etc., as far as establishing them, we really want to promote cutback of plant material to promote the diversity of the basins. A lot of times what happens is a wetland seed mix or plant material that's planted, there's a dominant component, and if left unchecked, it'll crowd out some of the smaller stuff that gets planted. So we recommend cutting back that plant material to promote the diversity of the basins. Additionally, we like to go in and selectively weed for invasive species and volunteer plant species to make sure that the overall health of these facilities are maturing properly. And then this is more for the conversion from ENS to post-construction for these facilities, but installing goose netting and matting. In these pictures, you can see a basin that we converted from an ENS erosion sedimentation facility to a finished wetland bottom basin. And so the installation of goose netting, which is basically fishing line strung between stakes with ribbon on it to keep Canada geese out, and matting down the seed mix, because if you get a big flushing rain, the matting will help keep the seed mixes where they're supposed to be. And so you don't have a lot of your meadow mix and rain garden mix washing down and making the downstream properties look better. And then really establishing a routine for maintenance and inspections. That's a really big thing that we try and stress to some of our older communities, the pre-2003, to really get ahead of some of the larger issues that can pop up. So as far as inspections, we like to inspect with our professional staff. So either myself as a civil engineer or someone on our staff like a landscape architect or engineer in training, engineering technician. But we also like to stress that our communities, they're on site all the time. They look out their window and see the basin. So if they see something, it's really good to let either your landscaper know or let your board know, to have someone come out and take a look at those issues. So during inspections, we like to look for scour and sedimentation. If there's scour at any point upstream of your basins, the sedimentation all washes down into the basin bottom. And we see a lot of older basins that have can be up to feet of sediment on top of where their approved basin bottom is. And that makes the basins dangerous for downstream property owners, as well as not really functioning property for the community. Additionally, we look for animal damage. We've seen instances where groundhogs are burrowing into structural fill berms. So the fill berm is the berm of the basin that kind of retains the water. And if left unchecked, they can wreak havoc and allow water to find a path of least resistance out of the basin that can result in catastrophic failure. And then we also evaluate for invasive species and monocultures, and we're able to kind of head those off before they become a major issue. And then as far as maintenance is concerned, we like to incorporate maintenance into your yearly landscape management contract, so that it's the landscaper working in connection with the board in really maintaining these facilities for you. And then as far as that goes, the cutbacks and removal of debris. A lot of times when people cut back basins, debris is left on site, and that really leads to a buildup of material. As that degrades in the basin, it can clog outlet structures. So the removal of that debris we've found is very recommended. Additionally, we like to blow out riprap. So at the inflow into basins, leaves, road debris, and sediment can wash into that stone at the inflow into the basin. So we like to blow that out and keep that clear. That kind of prevents scour along the edges of the riprap and keeps water entering the basins correctly. Additionally, clearing the outlet structure. So making sure the outlet structure is clear of debris is paramount in maintaining a healthy basin. Additionally, weeding and removal of volunteer plant material. So if an inspector, a landscape architect goes out, identifies areas where volunteer plant material couldn't be a problem, or if invasive material is getting in, like Phragmites in certain cases, how to get rid of that material. And as far as cutbacks, we found that 2 cutbacks per year prior to the basins being really established and healthy are fully recommended. We usually recommend like an end of summer, like a late July or August, where the taller plant material hasn't quite gone to seed yet, so we can get rid of that and allow everything to grow up together through the fall growing season, and then a dormant clearing of or cutback of the plant material. We find that if you cut it back in the spring, there's too much stress on the plant going into the drier summer months, and it's bad for the basins. And then as far as monitoring for invasives and monocultures, we typically recommend for our clients that 3 times during the growing season, someone come out and evaluate the basins. For our clients, we have trained landscape professionals that are doing that constantly. And then we really want to evaluate for scour and structural problems. Carl and Jeff both touched on this, but we recommend after 2-inch and greater storms, going out and just taking a look at the basins and making sure that there's not any structural problems that are starting to develop, like new channels being developed through the basin that are scouring, depositing sediment closer to the outlet structure and blocking things up. Additionally, we want to monitor outlet structure and inflow areas. And we found that training landscape professionals to perform this while on site, they're the people that are most intimately involved with your site besides property owners and management companies. So really training the landscape professionals to perform this work while they're on site is a huge bonus. And lastly, we really want to avoid overmowing naturalized basins to limit the effects of compaction. A lot of times we'll see people overmowing basins, and basins are naturally wet, so you get rutting, compaction, and it doesn't really allow for proper establishment of plant material. So some of our lessons learned, keeping riprap clear. Leaf removal is paramount. During the fall season is a prime time for things to get washed into your riprap. If you look at the picture in your top left, that's an inflow structure into a basin where you can see the sediment and road debris, leaves are washed in, and it's even starting to grow grass. And then if you look in the bottom left picture, that is another basin where the head wall is completely covered. So you can see that rectangular shape. There should be an 18-inch pipe poking out of that, but it's completely blocked up. Additionally, removing of debris after cutbacks. We really need to, when you cut back the basin, removing that plant debris to help stop the clogging of the outlet structure and stop the buildup of that dead plant material, which will raise your basin bottoms. So if you look at the picture in your top right, that's a clogged outlet structure. The top trash rack is completely covered. There's a bottom orifice that's about a foot buried with all of the detritus, and even the second stage weir is starting to get blocked up with plant material. And then we really want to look at volunteer trees. Where are they okay and where should they be removed? Obviously, if trees are starting to grow into structural components of your basin, around outlet structures, inflow pipes, over pipes, if you look at the picture in the bottom right, there's a volunteer willow that's growing basically out of an end wall structure, and we really want to eliminate that material. Additionally, trees that are growing on the back side or in the fill berms, so the berms that retain water in your basin, those should be removed. They really should be removed as soon as possible. So next, I want to touch on kind of the effects of aging infrastructure. So where does stormwater go in your community? It flows through swales into inlets. The inlets flow into storm sewers, and storm sewers run into stormwater best management practices, such as basins, rain gardens, underground facilities. And ultimately, that's the last place before it enters the natural world in creeks, streams, ponds, and lakes. So effectively managing all of those systems on your site is paramount. So the effects of aging infrastructure, neglected basins. So if you look at the picture in the top of your screen, this kind of has everything. It's got volunteer plant material in the fill berm. It's got scour, sedimentation, and even down at the back side of this, the outlet structure is clogged. So you really want to make sure that if you're an older community, you start to develop a plan. We work with a lot of our communities to develop a master plan when it comes to arboriculture or drainage or landscape, as to how to most effectively manage this, because these numbers can start to add up as communities age. Additionally, Gordon from Chester County forwarded me a picture where a pipe had failed in a basin berm, leading to a catastrophic failure. And there were also volunteer trees growing in that fill berm, which likely contributed to that. Next, we want to talk about storm sewer. A lot of communities that were built in the 90s had corrugated metal pipes, and we're starting to see throughout our region that those pipes are beginning to fail. So we really want to touch on, or like Jeff said, touching on inspecting those to determine their condition and develop a priorities for replacement. A lot of times these pipes, if they have minor damage, they can be remediated. But if they're like the pipe on the left-hand side of your screen, where the bottom is completely corroded and water's running on the outside of the pipe, that can lead to sinkholes and catastrophic failures, and really should be replaced as soon as possible. Concrete pipe, we really want to inspect joints and mortared areas. Concrete pipe is a lot easier to fix. Mortar can cure a lot of ills. And then we want to inspect if you start to see sinkholes along a pipe run where it's concrete pipe, sometimes where the reinforcing is in, so our concrete pipe has reinforcing steel. Sometimes there's void areas around that, and they can open up over time. So patching that, fixing sinkholes before they become major safety issues is a good idea. And lastly, plastic pipe. A lot of newer communities are using HDPE, which is high density polyethylene pipe, or solid like an SDR 35, which is a sewer and drain pipe. We recommend using double wall or solid pipe if you're going to go in and do some retrofitting of existing storm sewers, or have to go through and amend some or remediate some drainage areas. But the major issues that we see on sites is people using the single wall or flexible pipe. And if you look at the picture in the top, that kind of has every major issue. It's a pipe that doesn't have cleanouts, so there's no way to clear it if it becomes clogged with debris. It can get hit by mowers or crushed because it's not buried deeply or bedded in stone. Additionally, it can get cut by string trimmers because it's in a grassed area where it's above ground. And really, there was no real forethought as to where the water was going on the downstream side, so it's led to erosion. And then Jeff had touched on this, but I want to reiterate that keeping your inlets clear. The inlets are where water gets captured and goes underground. And once stuff goes underground, it's a lot easier, or it's a lot harder to get debris and stuff out of. So making sure that those are clear, the inlet grates and the underground portions of the inlets should be kept relatively clear throughout the year. It's as easy as just having a landscaper blow off the inlets, make sure he's not blowing stuff into the inlets, and extricating things that get stuck in there. Additionally, if you look at the picture in the bottom left, if you start to see sinkholes opening up around inlets, a lot of times in older communities, they bricked up the inlet covers to get them to grade. And over time, that brick has started to fail. So you start to see water getting in, not through the inlet grate, but through the joints between the top of grate and the actual inlet box. So fixing those issues before they become a safety concern is paramount. And lastly, I'll touch on plastic inlets. Plastic inlets are a great choice for localized and smaller drainage areas, but making sure that those are installed correctly. So they're bedded in stone, so they're not popping up out of the ground or sinking down into the ground, making sure that the connections to the pipes are made properly. If you look at the bottom right picture, that has kind of every issue. It's sticking up out of the ground. It doesn't have a good connection, so sediment has washed into that system and clogged that pipe. And then lastly, we're touching on swales. So the main issues that we see with swales are scour and sedimentation. So where a swale is steeper, it's more likely to scour if it doesn't have good quality turf. And then in flatter swales, as communities age, they start to fill in with sediment, debris, grass clippings. And so we recommend kind of regrading areas in where you see scour, getting the proper matting down. And if scour is really an issue, maybe installing riprap, which is kind of angular stone to help decrease the velocity of the water. And the best way to really keep your swales in great condition is to have good quality turf. And lastly, talking about impediments to swales, whether they be natural or man-made. If you're on the board of a community and you have like an architectural review board that reviews decks and patios and utilities going in, really making sure that sheds, decks, and patios aren't put in swales, especially in older communities where it's not as spelled out. Just making sure, because we see in a lot of older communities where people will put in decks or patios and they act effectively as a dam for swales, leading to all sorts of flooding issues, water running into people's basins, and ultimately having to regrade swales further away from people's houses. And lastly, putting like hedgerows or landscaping into swales, where some people think it's a good idea to have a tree in an area. If it's in a swale, eventually it'll lead to ponding and flooding issues. So that's most of my presentation. I just want to stress that having a plan for how to deal with stormwater management is a really good idea for older communities, really having something going forward to work with your landscaper, work with professionals to help get your communities to the place where they need to be. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Jessica.
Thank you very much, Zach. That was great. There are some questions in the chat, so we'll jump into that. Somebody asked about the presentation being sent out. Yes, we are recording it. I'll be able to email the link to that. Another mention, thank you, Robert, for reminding us that the Penn State Extension Master Gardener or Master Watershed Stewards is another program that's available to provide technical assistance and guidance, education. They are trained professionals that can help with everything regarding watershed protection, from engineering to naturalization. So Penn State Extension Master Watershed Stewards, another potential source of helpful volunteer information, in addition to the assistance that conservation districts can provide, from our technical 102 staff to our watershed specialists. All right, Zach, a couple questions for you. What are the best type of pipes used today for a new underground system for new homes being built in a development?
So that would really be up to the site conditions. There are a few different, Jeff had touched on them, either concrete vault you can use. We've built in the past with kind of HDPE perforated pipe in a stone bed. So you get the void space of the pipe plus the additional void space of the stone. But really that's up to the design engineer building the basin. For smaller things, like if you're building a new patio and this township's making you put in some sort of stormwater BMP, if you have infiltration, a seepage bed, the kind of box of rocks, as Jeff had said, is a great thing because it's not obtrusive and it's relatively easy to maintain if you have a filter inlet and leaf guards on your gutters. But rain gardens are additional things that you could install. But going back to the original question, there's a ton of different products and it all comes down to site conditions and cost. Yes, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that question. And next one, any idea how much yearly inspection costs? Is it an hourly charge or a flat rate?
Kind of depends on who you go with. What we do for our clients is a lot of times we'll include that with a landscape management contract to go out and have a professional such as myself or one of our landscape architects go out and evaluate basins. But I've also worked that into a yearly kind of management contract, as well as kind of a one-off going out and evaluating a site on an hourly basis. So the answer is it depends.
Thank you. Do you have a general idea how much it costs, like how much per 1,000 square feet, to naturalize a relatively young infiltration basin with native plants and seed?
I don't off the top of my head, but I can certainly offline take a look at basins and come up with a cost to do that. That's something that our company does for clients.
Thanks, Seth. Let's see here, see if there's anything else that came in. Roof water and seepage beds that are failing. What is recommended repair for a failing system?
In terms of so sometimes what will happen is the system gets clogged, in which case you have to exhume the system and kind of reinstall it. Sometimes it's as easy as if you can get a vacuum into the pipes to suck out anything that you can get or flush them. But a lot of times with underground systems, if there's not really a good maintenance ports to access it, they're very, very hard to maintain.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
I believe those are all the questions that came in at this time. Does anybody have anything else? If you do, please put it in the chat. Thank you very much, Zach. So I'll open it up now to any of our presenters today. Do you have any additional thoughts or comments on any of the questions that came up, or follow up to any of the discussion today?
I will say that being proactive is the best way to go after this. After the tropical storm last summer, I was incredibly busy dealing with drastic issues. And what we try and stress to our clients is dealing with things when they're minor is a way better way to manage. Just managing from an eyes open perspective of your site rather than managing from the rear and putting out fires all the time is a much better way to go about either capital planning or dealing with your community.
I would agree wholeheartedly with Zach. I think what we're seeing from the EPA level down to DEP and down to the conservation districts and townships, there's a drive for water quality improvement. And every couple of years when the MS4 program is renewed, so to speak, or reissued, the criteria get tighter and tighter. So I think it's good to be proactive, as Zach said, develop a plan to start addressing these issues, because I think sooner or later we're going to have to look at all basins, whether they're township owned or private. Now, one more quick thing I didn't mention during my presentation. There are several municipalities out there that have gone proactive that actually take over some of the basin responsibility. They vegetate it, naturalize it, so to speak, get it all cleaned out and operating. So depending on the township you're in, there may already be a program in place. Go to the township's website, find the township engineer, email them directly, and you can often find out if there's such a program. We're doing about a half a dozen of those between a couple different municipalities. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Any other thoughts before we wrap up today?
We appreciate the interest. Without a doubt, this has been a topic that needs to be discussed in many ways.
Absolutely.
Yes. Great. And this is a new topic. We have not done this presentation before. We welcome feedback. If you have other topics you're looking to learn about, other suggestions for upcoming workshops, the conservation districts are happy to provide that education and outreach. So just remember your resources. The districts is a great place to start. If we can't help you, we will direct you to the proper agency or organization who can. We also have tools, like we mentioned, the district has the drill for naturalizing basins, so don't hesitate to reach out. We probably can help in some way. All right, so we are on time, nearing 11, so we will wrap up at this time. I want to sincerely thank our 4 speakers. That was an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
We will.
Pleasure.
Great, thank you. We will send out the presentations to everybody so they have them. I know it's a lot of information. We'll provide it so you can digest it again at your leisure. So thank you very much for your time today. So don't hesitate to reach out. If you have any additional questions, put them in the chat now. I'll leave it open another minute. We're copying all of the chat information and sending that out. So thank you again for participating in today's webinar. Have a great day. Thank you to our 4 speakers. And that includes the event. Take care.
Thanks, Jess.
Here.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you, Jessica, for your help in setting this up.
Absolutely.